Welcome to VT Boss, where we don't just tell stories. We unearth the quiet truths that linger long after the screen fades to black. In today's video, you're about to witness a journey that begins a wrong turn in a silent whimper and ends with the kind of redemption that only love, unexpected, unconditional, and unspoken, can bring. This is not just a story about a man and a dog. It's a story about grief, legacy, and the kind of healing that shows up when you've stopped looking for it. The kind of story that might change how you see silence, second chances, and the footprints we leave behind. Stay until the very end, because this story carries a lesson too powerful to miss. And if it touches you, please leave a comment and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. That support means more than you know. They say no one really gets lost anymore. Not with GPS. Not with cell towers hanging off every hill like invisible watchmen. But that afternoon, I got lost. Not just on the road. On a deeper level. Somewhere in that quiet part of your mind where you stop, noticing the years slipping by. My name is Gabriel Hartley. I'm 46. I used to be a firefighter. I used to be a father. Now, I'm a delivery driver who keeps his eyes on the pavement and his questions to himself. That day, the rain started before I did. The kind of cold drizzle that doesn't make a scene, just seeps into your jacket, your shoes, and eventually your bones. I was halfway through my shift, en route to some rural address with no name on the mailbox. The kind of place people go to forget things, according to the GPS. The house was somewhere at the end of a gravel road that didn't look like it had been driven on in years. Still, I followed it. I always do. But the road narrowed, then split, then disappeared beneath a tangle of wet weeds and pine needles. I told myself I'd back out. I didn't. Maybe it was the quiet. Or the fact that no one was waiting for me at home. The van came to a stop in front of an old gate barely hanging from its hinges. The sign beside it was so faded it took me a minute to make out the letters. Willow Glen Kennels. A wave of unease ran down my spine. I remembered the name. A breeding facility. Shut down years ago after too many complaints, neglect, poor conditions, worse things I didn't want to picture. I should have turned around. Instead, I killed the engine. That's when I heard it. Not a bark, not a growl, just a sound. Small, wet, a whimper, like breath being held too long and slipping out by accident. I sat there, staring through the windshield streaked with rain, wondering if I'd imagined it. Then it came again, so faint I nearly missed it. I opened the door and stepped out. My boots sank into soft earth, the kind that clings like it wants to remember your steps. The rain soaked through my jacket in seconds. I pushed open the gate. It screeched like something out of a bad dream. Beyond was a graveyard of collapsed fencing, broken cages, and rusted barrels. The place smelled of mold and old hay. The kind of stillness that comes after something has been abandoned, not just by people, but by time. I followed the sound. It led me past a tangle of wire and into what looked like a half-collapsed shed at the back of the lot. The door was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. I pulled it open. The smell hit me first, wet fur, mildew, something like rot. And then I saw her. Curled in the corner of a rusted cage, barely the size of a kitchen table, was a German shepherd. Her coat was soaked, her body shivering, belly swollen. Clearly pregnant. One I was half closed from swelling, but the other locked onto mine, and I froze, not in fear, in recognition. I had seen those eyes before, 10 years ago, during a flood that took nearly everything. I'd been trapped in a truck with rising water up to my neck. My son, Eli, had been with me, just 10 years old. We'd been coming back from a fishing trip, argued over something dumb. I told him no to ice cream. He pouted. I snapped, and then the bridge gave out beneath us like it had been made of paper. The current hit us like a freight train. I tried to reach him. I didn't make it. The last thing I remember was the windshield cracking, the cold, and then jaws. Something pulled me out. A dog. I never saw where it came from. I just remember teeth gripping my jacket collar, dragging me toward a muddy riverbank. Just far enough to survive. I passed out. When I woke up, rescue crews said they found me face down in the mud. They didn't mention any dog. But I remembered those eyes. Sharp, focused, fierce. And now they were staring back at me from a broken cage, through the dark. Jesus, I whispered. I stepped closer. The cage wasn't even locked, just a loop of wire twisted around the door latch. It came off easily. The door creaked open. She didn't move, didn't growl, didn't run. She just watched. I crouched down and placed a hand gently under her chest. Her ribs trembled under my fingers. She was too light, her frame mostly bone under matted fur. When I lifted her, she didn't resist. She tucked her nose into my jacket, like she'd been waiting for this moment all her life. And maybe I had been, too. I carried her through the rain, back to the van, wrapped her in my delivery jacket, and laid her in the passenger seat. She didn't make a sound, just closed her eyes and exhaled the saddest, longest breath I've ever heard. I didn't start the van right away. I sat there, hands gripping the wheel, staring out into the wet nothingness, wondering what I was doing. Who rescues a half-dead dog from a condemned kennel in the middle of a workday? Someone who no longer believes he has anything left to lose. The ride home was silent. No music, just the rhythmic click of the wipers and the sound of her breathing beside me. Shallow, slow, but steady. I parked in front of my cabin on the edge of town, a weathered place with a crooked porch and a maple tree that shed leaves like it was trying to forget each season. I carried her inside and placed her on an old folded blanket near the fireplace. I built a small fire with shaking hands. The house smelled of cedar and old regrets. She curled into the warmth without a sound, and I sat on the couch, watching her chest rise and fall, not speaking, not moving, not even thinking. For the first time in years, I didn't reach for the bottle hidden behind the cupboard. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat there, and then, without really planning to, I whispered, "I guess I can't just call you dog, huh?" She didn't respond, of course, but one ear twitched. "All right," I said softly. "How about Sage?" The name came from nowhere, but once I said it, it felt like it had always been hers. Sage. I don't know how long I sat there that night. Just the two of us, listening to fire crackle and the rain slowed down to a whisper. But I do remember thinking one thing very clearly. I didn't rescue her. She came to rescue what was left of me. The fire crackled gently that night, and the cabin smelled of damp pine and quiet resolve. Sage lay curled on the old blanket by the hearth, her breathing uneven but calm, like someone who had run too far for too long and had finally found a place to stop. I didn't sleep much, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to miss the sound of her being there. It's funny, the things you notice when the silence isn't empty anymore. The soft rise and fall of her chest, the occasional twitch in her paw, the way her ears would lift just slightly whenever the fire popped. I hadn't felt this kind of stillness in a long time, not since before the flood, before Eli, before the silence became too loud to bear. Somewhere near midnight, I brought over another old blanket and gently tucked it around her. She didn't open her eyes, but I swear her breathing eased. I sat down beside her on the floor, legs crossed like I hadn't done since I was a boy, and I just watched her sleep. She wasn't just a dog. There was something else in her, a presence, a knowing, like she'd seen things I couldn't name, and still chose to trust me. It took me an hour to get back on my feet again, not because my legs were stiff, but because my chest was... By morning, the rain had stopped, but the clouds still hung low, as if the sky wasn't ready to move on just yet. Neither was I. Sage was still asleep when I got up, curled tight, like a comma in the middle of a sentence that wasn't finished. I made coffee the way I always did, too strong, too bitter, but I didn't drink it. Instead, I poured a second mug and placed it on the table across from mine. She was still there, and somehow that meant something. Later that day, I made her a bed, not the fancy kind, just an old sleeping bag, some flannel I'd never gotten around to donating, and my thick winter coat, the one I used to wear on rescue calls back in my firefighting days. The same coat I'd nearly tossed out a dozen times, but never could. When I laid it down beside the fire, Sage stood, slowly with effort, and walked over to it. She sniffed the coat once, then curled into it like she'd found home. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I let it out. She stayed like that for hours. Later, I opened every cupboard I had, looking for anything remotely edible for a dog. Not much. 2 boiled eggs and a can of tuna. I set it in an old ceramic bowl and placed it beside her. She ate without hesitation. No excitement, no rush. Just quiet, grateful bites, like someone who didn't expect kindness, but accepted it all the same. That night, I built a second fire. Not because we were cold, but because the warmth seemed to remind us both that this wasn't just another day survived. It was a day we actually shared. I sat on the couch and watched her sleep in my coat, and I realized something that made my chest ache. I'd spent the last 10 years pushing people away, because it was easier than explaining why I couldn't let them in. I kept my grief like a secret I was too tired to defend. But Sage, she didn't ask for explanations. She just curled up beside them. At some point, I fell asleep on the couch. I woke to the sound of a low whimper. Hers. I sat up, startled, heart pounding, but she was just dreaming, her paws twitching, her mouth moving slightly like she was chasing something in her sleep. Maybe a memory. Maybe hope. The next few days blurred. I called out of work. Something I hadn't done in years. Told them I had the flu. They didn't ask questions. I spent the days reading articles about canine pregnancies and watching low-res YouTube videos with awkward voiceovers explaining what to expect when your rescue dog is expecting. Sage grew stronger. She started following me into the kitchen. Her paws clicking softly against the floorboards like metronome reminded me that time was moving forward, whether I was ready or not. She had quirks, beautiful ones. She barked at the vacuum cleaner like it had insulted her ancestors. She tried to climb into the bathtub while I was showering, then looked personally offended when I told her no. One afternoon, she spent a full hour barking at a National Geographic documentary on wolves. She preferred sleeping on the couch, but only if my flannel jacket was there. If it wasn't, she'd just stand and stare at me until I figured it out. Sometimes I'd find her lying on my bed, her head resting on the same pillow where Eli used to nap after Sunday morning pancakes. I didn't have the heart to move her. She was quiet, but not passive, gentle, but with a backbone I recognized from long ago. She made me laugh. For real, not the kind of half laugh you use to be polite. The kind that shakes something loose inside your chest you forgot was stuck. And then one night, while we sat by the fire, me with my lukewarm decaf, her stretched out on the rug, something inside me cracked open. I didn't plan it, didn't rehearse it. I just said it. I had a boy. I whispered, eyes fixed on flames. Eli, 10 years old, bright as anything. He would have loved you. Sage didn't move, but something in the room shifted. I couldn't save him, I said, my voice catching halfway through. The river took the truck. I tried to reach him, but the current. I stopped, swallowed, started again. But a dog pulled me out, just like you. Still, Sage didn't move. But I swear she heard me. Maybe not with her ears, but with whatever lives in the space where pain makes room for understanding. I never got to say thank you, I said. And in that silence, with the fire crackling low and the weight of memory pressing soft and heavy against my shoulders, I realized something. Maybe I was saying it now. To her, to him, to myself. From that night on, the house felt different. Not louder, not busier, just less hollow. I started talking again, out loud, not because I needed to fill space, but because I had someone to share it with. I told Sage about the fishing trips I never took, the jokes Eli used to make, the way his laughter used to bounce off these walls like it had nowhere better to be. And Sage listened. She didn't offer answers, but she offered presence. And sometimes that's more than enough. One morning, I looked out the window and saw the first flurry of snow brushing across the trees. Early for the season, but fitting. Sage was standing by the porch, her belly noticeably heavier now, her stance slower, steadier. Life was coming, not just into her, but into me. I stood behind her, placed a hand gently on her head, and whispered, "We're not lost anymore, are we?" She didn't answer, but she didn't need to, because for the first time in a decade, I felt something flicker inside my chest that I hadn't dared name in years. Hope. I always thought the quietest hours of the day were just before dawn, before the sun decides whether it wants to rise, before the world remembers how to make noise again. But I learned there's a different kind of silence, one that comes before something begins. That night, I was curled up in a recliner by the fire, book resting on my chest, eyes half closed. Sage was lying on the blankets by the hearth, her body round now, breathing deep and slow. It had become our routine. Late evenings, warm light, and an unspoken agreement to not rush anything. Then she whimpered. It wasn't like before. Not a dream twitch or a half bark. This was different. Sharp. Urgent. I sat up fast, the book thudding to the floor. Sage was shifting on the blanket, panting, her muscles tightening and releasing like waves. Her eyes darted to me, wide, but not afraid. More like, you're here. That's enough. Panic flickered in my chest. Despite the countless articles, vet hotlines, and videos I consumed about dog births, none of it felt real until that moment. Suddenly I was on my knees, fumbling through towels and clean rags, warming water in the microwave with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Sage grunted softly, her body tensing again. You're okay, I whispered. You've got this, girl. I'm right here. Outside, snow had started to fall. Late for autumn, early for winter, but perfectly timed for us. The fire crackled, the clock ticked, and Sage worked, her body trembling, her breath shallow but determined. I knelt beside her, wiping her brow with a damp cloth, whispering words I barely understood myself. I was talking as much to her as I was to the scared boy hiding somewhere in my chest, the one who once lost everything and never thought he'd be asked to witness life again. Then, just as the first puppy began to crown, a memory slammed into me like a wave. It was the night the bridge collapsed. The rain, the sound of Eli's voice, the cold, crushing silence that came when I realized I couldn't get to him. And then, those eyes, burning through the dark, a German shepherd pulling me from death's grip with teeth clenched around my collar. No one ever found the dog. No one believed me. They said I hallucinated. But I remembered. I always remembered. The eyes, the fire in them, the certainty. Back in the living room, the first puppy emerged. Wet, tiny, but moving. I wrapped in a towel and gently rubbed. It squeaked, a high, clear sound that punched a hole through the heavy silence. Life, messy, fragile, real. Sage licked the pup instinctively, curling around it like she'd done this 1,000 times. Her body was exhausted, but her gaze was steady. Another contraction hit, then another. Over the next 2 hours, 6 more pups arrived. I worked beside her, wiping, wrapping, lining them up beside her belly so they could nurse. My hands, which had once held fire hoses and pulled bodies from wreckage, now shook holding something no larger than a pair of socks. And then came the 7th. This one was smaller, slower. I held my breath as it slid into my hands, limp and wet. I rubbed its chest gently with a towel. Nothing. Then a twitch. Then a sound. A soft, weak cry. I exhaled, and just as I pulled the towel away to check for anything abnormal, I froze. There, over its left shoulder, was a patch of white fur. Not a blur or a blotch, but a crooked heart, exactly like the one I remembered. I blinked. Once. Twice. My vision blurred, but I wasn't crying. Not yet. I turned the pup in my hands, inspecting it like it might dissolve if I didn't handle it just right. The white patch wasn't just similar. It was identical. A single, perfect heart, just like Jasper's. My knees gave out, and I sat back on the floor, the puppy cradled in both palms. Sage watched me with soft eyes, her body wrapped around her other pups, her breathing shallow but calm. No way, I whispered. No, there's just no way. And yet, there it was. Same markings, same spot, same crooked heart. I looked at Sage. She didn't move, but her gaze didn't leave mine. It was as if she knew, as if she'd always known. I named the pup Theo, Theodore, gift of God, not because I needed to be poetic, but because in that moment, there was no other word that felt big enough to hold what was in my hands. He was smaller than the others. Weaker, too, but alive, warm, real. I stayed by the fire until the embers faded into soft, red dust. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I was afraid that if I closed my eyes, I'd wake up and none of it would be real. By morning, the snow had stopped, blanketing the yard in quiet white. Inside, the cabin smelled with smoke, wet fur, and something else I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Sage was still curled around her puppies, and Theo was nestled against her belly, twitching slightly in his sleep. I made coffee. Strong. Bitter. Just how I liked it. But this time, I didn't forget to pour a second cup. I sat beside the fire with both mugs, one in my hand, one waiting patiently on the table, and I listened, not just to the puppy's squeaks or the wind tapping against the window, but to my own heartbeat. It was slower, steadier, different. Later that day, I called the nearest vet who was known for helping with rescue cases. The clinic was an hour away, small, tucked between a feed store and a laundromat. But I needed someone to tell me I hadn't imagined the markings, that Theo was real, that this, whatever this was actually happening. Dr. Amelia Burns agreed to see us the following morning. That night, Sage curled up on my coat again, this time with 7 tiny bodies snuggled against her side. I watched her sleep, watched them twitch and nuzzle and squeak, and I realized something that nearly brought me to tears. I wasn't alone anymore, and I hadn't just brought Sage home. She brought someone back to me. I didn't know how or why. Maybe I never would, but I knew this. The past hadn't come back to haunt me. It had come back to heal me. And somewhere between the first whimper and the last breath of that night, I stopped being a man who had lost everything and started becoming a man who had just been given a second chance. I wasn't sure what made me write the blog post. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was a look Sage gave me when Theo finally latched onto her side, a look that said, "You've done enough now. Rest." Or maybe it was a silence, the kind that settles not because there's nothing left to say, but because something is finally ready to be said out loud. That evening, I sat at the old kitchen table, my laptop humming softly, its battery half dead, and stared at the blinking cursor. I hadn't written anything personal in over a decade. I didn't keep journals, didn't share my thoughts on social media. I wasn't that guy. But this wasn't about being seen. It was about witnessing something that demanded to be remembered. So I wrote. I wrote about the storm, about the road that didn't exist on any map, about the condemned kennel and the eyes I couldn't forget. I wrote about Sage, about her stillness, her trust, her strength. I wrote about the night Theo was born and the way the crooked heart-shaped patch on his shoulder had knocked the air out of my lungs. I wrote about Jasper, the dog no one believed existed, the one who had pulled me from the river 10 years ago and vanished without a trace. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I just told the truth, the way you do when there's no one to impress. Only someone, somewhere, who might need to hear it. I titled it The Shepherd Who Came Back. I hit publish. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few clicks. Maybe a spam comment or two. But by morning, the blog had gone viral. It was surreal, watching the numbers climb like wildfire. Shares, comments, emails. People from everywhere, all walks of life. Veterans, animal lovers, widows, foster parents. People who had experienced loss and found comfort in the most unexpected places. They wrote about dogs that saved them, healed them, stayed with them through sickness and divorce and grief. But one message stood out. It arrived in the late afternoon, buried between marketing spam and donation requests. The subject line simply read, "I believe I once knew Jasper." I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The sender's name was Eleanor Page. She was 71 years old. The message was short. No punctuation. No fluff. My late husband and I adopted a German shepherd named Jasper from a rescue shelter in Ridgefield about 12 years ago. My husband served 2 tours overseas. Jasper was a shadow. When cancer came, Jasper never left his side. After Walter passed, Jasper stayed with me. He slept at the foot of the bed, followed me everywhere. After the flood, he vanished. I thought he drowned. I never knew he kept saving lives. Thank you for letting me know he didn't stop being a hero. I read the message 3 times. And then I sat there, my fingers hovering over the keys, not knowing what to say back. Because how do you respond to someone who just handed you the last piece of a decade-long puzzle? How do you thank someone for loving the dog who saved your life? Eventually, I wrote back. I told her everything. About Sage, the rescue, the birth, the markings on Theo. I asked if she wanted to meet. She replied the same night. Yes, not over coffee, she wrote, not in a diner. She wanted to see him, see her. She wanted to meet the man who had been loved by the same dog in a different chapter of life. 2 days later, she pulled into my driveway in an old gray sedan, a little beat up but steady. Kind of like her. She was thin, bird-like, with silver hair pinned neatly, and a coat that looked like it had survived many winters. On her lapel was a brooch shaped like a paw print. She stepped out slowly, eyes scanning the porch, the trees, the ground. Then she saw Sage, sitting just behind the screen door, calm, watchful, regal. Her breath caught. That's her, she whispered. No, I said gently. That's Sage, Jasper's daughter. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just looked at the dog, at each other, and something settled between us, quiet and unspoken. We sat inside for hours. Tea, oatmeal cookies, the fire burning low. Eleanor spoke of Walter, her late husband, a decorated Army medic who hated medals but kept every one of them in a shadow box because they weren't for him. They were for the ones who didn't come home. She told me how Jasper had been his second skin, how after Walter died, Jasper slept by her bedroom door every night like he still had a mission to complete, how the night of the flood, she couldn't find him, how she believed for years that he had simply gone off to die alone. I thought he was done, she said, her voice low. But he wasn't, I said. He found me. She looked down at Theo, who was curled in her lap, fast asleep. Looks just like him, she said, gently touching the patch on his shoulder. I know. For the rest of the afternoon, we sat in that same spot, trading stories about dogs, about grief, about the peculiar ache of growing older in a world that forgets to slow down for you. She told me about how quiet the house had gotten after Jasper left, how even the cat started sleeping in strange places, confused by the silence. I told her about Eli, about the way I couldn't bring myself to sell his things, about the truck still parked in the garage, rusting, tires flat, because it was the last thing we rode in together. She didn't try to fix it. She just listened. She understood. Before she left, she stood at the porch, looking at the maple trees swaying in the wind. I don't know what made me check the blog that night, she said. I don't usually read much online, but something told me to click. Maybe it was Jasper, I said, only half joking. She didn't laugh. She just smiled, that kind of smile that carries weight. Maybe it was... As she drove away, I watched until her car disappeared down the road. Then I turned to Sage, who had come to stand beside me, her head leaning gently against my thigh. You found your way home, didn't you? I whispered. She didn't bark. She didn't move. She just stood there. And I knew we weren't lost anymore. 2 weeks after Eleanor's visit, she returned with a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a letter, not a card, just a page torn from a notebook. The lines faintly smudged with the kind of ink that comes from a shaky but determined hand. She placed it on my kitchen table, beside a cup of coffee I just poured her. I've been thinking, she said, adjusting the little paw print brooch on her coat. What if Sage didn't just come back to bring peace to you and me? What if we did something with all of this? Something that keeps going. I looked at the paper. On it was a rough sketch, nothing detailed, more shapes and words than anything architectural. But I saw what she meant immediately. A place, not a business. Not a shelter. Something in between. A home. For those who had lost something, someone, and didn't quite know what to do with the emptiness that followed. What are you thinking? I asked, though my chest already knew the answer. She smiled, small and sure. Let's build something that delivers more than boxes, she said. Let's build something that delivers healing. We called it the Quiet Haven, not a rescue center in the traditional sense. There were no cages stacked in rows, no clipboard checklists at the door. It wasn't a charity or a brand. It was a porch light left on, a soft place of land for both dogs and people who had nowhere else to go. We started small, just Sage, her pups, and a few seniors in our community that Eleanor had quietly kept tabs on over the years. People who'd lost spouses, children, homes, people who didn't speak much anymore, people who ate dinner in silence and stared out windows longer than they should, people like me. We didn't put up signs. We didn't post ads. We told stories around kitchen tables, on walks through the neighborhood, at farmers' markets where Eleanor would bring soup in mason jars, and I'd stand awkwardly beside a homemade flyer that simply read, "Do you have love left but no one to give it to? We might have someone for you." And it worked. Word spread, not like wildfire, but like roots. Quiet, slow, but deep. The first to come was Georgia, a retired librarian whose hand shook when she tried to hold a teacup, but steadied the moment we placed one of Sage's pups, a quiet little male named Max, into her lap. She cried without making a sound. Then came Tom, a widower who hadn't smiled in 3 years, not since his wife died of Parkinson's. We paired him with Bella, a feisty shepherd mix who chewed up his slippers on day one. He bought her a second pair the next day and laughed for the first time in months. We didn't charge anyone, didn't fill out endless forms. We asked them questions that mattered. Tell me about who you lost. What's the quietest part of your day? What would you do if someone sat beside you and didn't need you to speak? The dogs came in waves. Some were found in fields, others tied to fences. Some dropped off quietly in front of our porch like confessions too heavy to carry any further. We took them all. Old, sick, terrified, shy. Every dog had a place. Sage watched it all unfold. Her puppies, now curious and wobbly-legged, grew into little explorers. Theo, the smallest one with the heart-shaped patch, was the gentlest. He didn't bark much, but he had a way of sitting beside someone and making them feel seen. We matched him with Claire, a schoolteacher who had just finished her final round of radiation. She came to us looking for something to hold on to. Theo curled into her lap that day and wouldn't leave. She named him her recovery companion. Somehow, people started sending donations. Local high schoolers volunteered to build a website. A church group donated blankets. A grocery store delivered overstocked pet food once a week without ever sending a bill. One afternoon, I found a hand-painted sign leaning against the front gate. "You deliver hope here." I don't know who made it. I just hung it proudly by the door. Eleanor began coming by every day, at first just to help, then to stay. Eventually, she moved into the small guest cottage I'd spent years pretending I'd renovate someday. She filled it with secondhand furniture and jars of dried lavender. Wind chimes hung from the porch. Books stacked in piles she never quite finished, but always intended to. She laughed more now. Loud, belly-deep laughter that caught both of us by surprise. I started cooking again, learning to follow her recipes, sometimes succeeding, sometimes setting off the smoke alarm. She rolled her eyes, but always stayed in the kitchen. We weren't a couple, not in the way people expect. We were something steadier. Two people who'd seen too much loss to ask for more than quiet company, and someone to split the last biscuit with. The dogs claimed every inch of the house. Paw prints on the floors. No smudges on windows. Barking at the mailman like it was a sacred ritual. But it didn't feel chaotic. It felt alive. And through it all, Sage remained our anchor. She didn't run anymore, didn't bark as often, but she watched. She watched as people came and left with tears and laughter. She watched as her pups grew and found homes and healed wounds they couldn't even name. She watched Eleanor and me sit on the porch in the evenings, sipping tea, not saying much. Sometimes, in the stillest hours of night, I'd wake up and find her lying by my door, eyes half closed, tail thumping softly. And I knew she was making sure we were okay, that we were still home, still healing, still delivering. Sage had always been quiet, but now it was a different kind of quiet. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. She napped a little longer, Took more time to get up from her favorite rug by the fireplace. Her eyes still followed me around the room. Still watched over the younger dogs like a benevolent queen, but the energy behind her movements had softened. She still greeted me when I came through the door, tail wagging, eyes lit, but not with the same enthusiasm. It was more like a nod now, as if she were saying, I'm still here, but I won't be forever. Then came the call. One of the pups, Luna, the speckled little girl who'd gone to a retired paramedic named Greg, had been rushed to the vet, breathing issues, weakness, lethargy. Greg had done everything right, noticed the signs early, but it wasn't enough. The vet said it was a congenital heart defect. Nothing anyone could have prevented. One of those silent things, hiding beneath the surface, until it didn't anymore. Luna didn't make it through the night. When Greg called to tell me, his voice cracked halfway through the sentence. I don't know why I'm taking this so hard, he whispered. I only had her for 2 months, but it feels like I lost a piece of something I didn't know I needed. I didn't have an answer for him, because I understood. After I hung up, I went out to the porch, sat on the top step. The air was cold, but I didn't feel it. Sage came out, as she always did, and rested her head against my knee. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. She knew. A week later, she stopped eating. We tried broth, hand-fed bits of chicken. Eva her old favorites, scrambled eggs with a dash of cheese. Nothing worked. She'd sniff the food, then look up at me, eyes clear but tired, as if to say, it's all right. You don't have to try so hard. Eleanor came by with blankets and soft music, and all the remedies she swore by. She sat beside Sage and whispered old poems into her ears. Sage would listen, eyes half-lidded, tail flicking once or twice, when the rhythm pleased her. But she didn't eat. She didn't play. She stopped following me room to room. She simply stayed close, present. Still, I took her to Dr. Burns, the same vet who confirmed her lineage all those months ago. Dr. Burns examined her gently, her fingers moving with reverence along Sage's spine, her belly, her joints. She's older than we thought, the doctor said quietly. And whatever she went through before you found her, those kinds of injuries, even when healed on the outside, leave where on the inside. I nodded. I didn't need more explanation. We both knew. That night, I made up a bed for her by the fireplace, the same spot she had first curled into when I brought her home. I laid down beside her on the floor, my arm resting gently over her side, feeling the rhythm of her breathing. Slower now, but steady. Outside, the branches of the old maple swayed in the wind. Leaves drifted down like soft goodbyes. I rested my forehead against hers. My boy used to hold my hand like this. I whispered, my fingers wrapping gently around her paw, when the night scared him, when he wanted me to stay until he fell asleep. My voice cracked, but I kept talking, not to fill the silence, but because it was the last thing I had to give. I told myself for years that I failed him, that I didn't hold on tight enough, that I should have gone with him. She didn't move, but her paw shifted slightly into my hand. Her eyes opened once, soft, warm, trusting, then closed again. You hold on to me this time, I said. She didn't make a sound. Somewhere before sunrise, she slipped away. No struggle, no sharp breath, just a long, quiet exhale, like she was letting go of something she carried for far too long. I didn't cry at first. I sat there, hands still on her fur, watching the fire dim into a field of sleepy embers. Then I wrapped her in my old flannel jacket, the one she always chose over every blanket in the house, the one that still smelled faintly of pine and river and thyme. Eleanor arrived at dawn. She didn't knock, just walked in, saw me kneeling by Sage's side, and placed her hand on my shoulder. We buried her under the maple tree, the same one where she'd loved to lie and watch the leaves flutter down like golden rain. We dug slowly, the earth soft from last night's frost. We lined the spot with pine cones and wildflowers from a yard. I placed one of Eli's old toy trucks beside her, not because she had known him, but because somehow, in ways I couldn't explain, she had carried him. When it was done, Eleanor stood with me in silence. No eulogies, no speeches, just stillness. the kind that wraps around your ribs and reminds you that not every goodbye has to be loud to matter. That evening, I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the blank screen of my laptop. Then I opened a new blog post. I titled it simply, Sage, and I wrote, "Some lives arrive not to stay long, but to remind us what never really leaves. Not every soul that saves us walks on two legs. Sometimes they arrive in the rain, broken but brave, with eyes that remember what we tried to forget. Sage was my reminder that the world, no matter how cold it gets, still holds moments of warmth that never truly fade. That night, I slept with the window cracked open. The wind rustled the maple leaves, the room cool but not cold. I dreamed of a crooked heart-shaped patch on a pup's shoulder, of a boy's laughter echoing through a cabin, of a shepherd who never needed words to speak volumes. And when I woke, I didn't feel empty, just quiet. And somehow, that felt like enough. The house was quieter now. Not empty, but quieter. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache. The kind that settles. There were still paw prints on the floor, still chew marks on the corner of the coffee table, still nose smudges on the lower half of every window. Theo, the smallest pup with a crooked heart-shaped patch, had grown into a lanky, calm companion who liked to sit with his back against my leg whenever I read by the fire. But even he seemed to notice that something had shifted. The absence of Sage wasn't loud. It was everywhere in the gentle kind of way a song fades, but you're still humming the melody an hour later. Then came the muddy footprints. I noticed them one morning on the porch, small human footprints, zigzagging back and forth through the frost-wet boards. At first, I thought maybe one of the volunteers had brought their kid along. Then I noticed the same prints the next day. And the next, on the fourth day, I saw him. He stood at the fence, skinny, pale, maybe 9 years old, watching from a distance. He didn't move when I stepped outside, didn't wave, just stood there with a stick in his hand, drawing circles in the dirt with the kind of attention only a lonely child can give. I recognized that stillness, that silence that wasn't shy, just worn thin. His name was Micah, lived 3 houses down, raised by his grandmother after his parents' separation. I'd seen him before, sitting alone on the swing set, walking laps around the yard, talking to no one in particular. That morning, I opened the gate. "You want to say hi?" I asked. He didn't answer, but he didn't run either. Theo was the one who made the first move. He trotted up slowly, wagging his tail, no urgency, just curiosity. He stuck his nose through the fence and let out a small bark, more a question than a warning. Micah took a step forward, then another. He reached out his hand, and Theo licked his fingers. That's how it started. At first, Micah would just sit on the porch, watching, silent. He'd stay for an hour, then disappear back down the street without a word. But after a week, he brought biscuits. After 2, he asked if he could help feed the dogs. He never said much, just did the work. Brush fur, filled bowls, walked them up and down the driveway. But every now and then, he'd glance at me with a question in his eyes. The kind you don't ask out loud because you're afraid of the answer. One afternoon, as we sat throwing tennis balls to the pups, he turned to me. "Did Sage really save your life?" I looked down at Theo, curled in Micah's lap, tail flicking with contentment. "She saved me in more ways than one," I said. And so I told him everything about the flood, about Eli, about the dog with the fierce eyes who pulled me out when I had nothing left to hold on to, about finding Sage, about the crooked little heart on Theo's shoulder. Micah didn't interrupt, just nodded once, then asked, "Do you think dogs know when you love them?" I paused. I said slowly, "they know it before we do." Spring came slowly that year, not in big gestures, no dramatic blooms or sudden warmth, but in small, consistent changes, the kind that remind you healing isn't always loud. The quiet haven kept going. New dogs came. New people found their way to us. One man, recently widowed, asked if he could help build a garden near the maple tree, the same tree where we'd laid Sage to rest. Eleanor planted lavender and rosemary, said they were for peace and memory. Michael watered them without being asked. Eleanor, by then, had fully moved into the guest house. We didn't talk about it. It just happened, like everything else that had mattered in my life lately. One morning, she brought over a small package. Inside was a stack of printed books, soft covers, warm illustrations on the front. My blog entries, bound together, titled The Delivery That Found Me. "You've written something that needs to be shared," she said, "and not just on a screen." We gave them away to nursing homes, veteran centers, cancer clinics, classrooms. Every copy had a handwritten note inside. "To the one who reads this, you're not alone. Love is pause. Keep your door open." One day, a small community center invited me to speak. It wasn't a big deal, just a room full of retired teachers, nurses, and veterans. But as I stood in front of them, palms sweating, pages shaking in my hands, I remembered something Sage had taught me. You don't have to say everything. Just say the part that matters. So I told them about a rainy road and a broken-down kennel, about a delivery that never made it to its destination, about the dog who saved me, and the life she gave back to me in 7 tiny heartbeats. I ended with this. That day, I never found the house I was supposed to deliver to. The GPS failed. The road vanished. But I found something else. I found my way back to my own heart. There was a long pause afterward. No one clapped right away. They didn't need to. The room was full. Not of sound, but of something better. Recognition. Back at home that evening, Micah sat on the porch beside me. Theo rested at his feet, tail curled against his leg. The sky was painted in the soft blush of a spring sunset. The wind carried the scent of lavender and cedar. "I think Sage would have liked this," Micah said quietly. "I think she already does," I replied. He looked at me then, not with child's eyes, but with the gaze of someone who'd seen things too early, who knew that sometimes the world wasn't fair, but still held on anyway. "I'm glad I came here," he said. I reached over and gently tapped his shoulder. "Me too." Eleanor joined us a few minutes later, holding 2 mugs of tea, a third in her hand for Micah, chamomile with honey. He accepted it like it was the most normal thing in the world. And in that moment, it wasn't a grand ending. No parade, no final scene, just a porch, 3 people, a dog, and the kind of peace you don't find unless you've lost something first. Sage was gone, but she had left something behind. Not just Theo, not just a haven. She left a lesson that sometimes what you think is an ending is just a quiet beginning. That sometimes you have to get lost to find where you belong. And sometimes the ones who rescue us don't wear uniforms or give speeches. Sometimes they arrive in silence, with muddy paws and remembering eyes. And they teach us, without words, how to live again. If you made it this far, you've seen the quiet power connection, how one dog, one child, and one grieving man found their way back to life through a string of ordinary, beautiful moments. At the Story Atelier, we believe stories like this aren't just to be heard, they're to be held, shared, remembered. This story reminds us that not every home has 4 walls, and not every savior wears a cape. Sometimes they have muddy paws and a heartbeat that matches your own. Sometimes healing comes not with noise, but with presence. As Viktor Frankl once said, "What is to give light must endure burning." Every character in this journey walked through fire and came out carrying light. If this story made you feel something, leave a comment below. If it reminded you of someone you've loved and lost, or someone who showed up when you didn't expect them to, let us know. And if you believe stories like this deserve a place in the world, please subscribe to VD Boss. Your support helps me create more meaningful, soulful stories. Because in a world full of noise, we need more quiet echoes that stay.